My guest today is Willy Boulter. Willy is an executive director and the chief commercial officer of Indigo Airlines. Indigo, with over 250 aircraft fleet, is one of the top 20 global carriers and the biggest and most profitable airline in India. With 35 years work experience, 25 of which are at the executive level, Willy can be described as a veteran in running profitable airlines. His career started in Cathay Pacific, where he was general manager, before taking up C-suite roles in leading airlines including Virgin Atlantic Airways, South African Airways, Etihad, and an Emirates-sponsored venture in Angola. Willy understands what it takes to run a business profitably, sustainably, and has functional experience in all areas of commercial activity, including sales, marketing, revenue management, network planning, alliances, international relations, cargo, IT, and regional management. He was the CEO of Russia's first low-cost carrier, Sky Express. Born in Singapore, Willy is a UK-Irish national and has a master's degree from Oxford University. He is also an alumnus of Standhurst and served as an officer in the Royal Artillery and Royal Hong Kong Regiment. He is a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society.
So welcome to MakeorMar Moments with Monehin. My guest today is Willy Boulter. Welcome, Willy.
Hi, good morning to you, Akin. Good afternoon here.
Yes.
Great to be here and to see you again after so many years.
Same here, Willy. Thank you very much. Let's just dive straight in. I want to ask, who is Willy Boulter?
Well, it's a long answer maybe, but I was basically I'm in my 60s now. I was born in Singapore and lived as a kid. My father was a soldier with the British Army, so I lived around Singapore and then KL in Malaysia, then in a couple of years in Germany. But by the time I was 8 or 9, we went back to the UK, and so I was educated, through my school years and university years in the UK. And then when I was 22, coming out of uni, I basically got a job with the Swire Group, who own Cathay Pacific Airways. And I was assigned to the airline, and that's where my airline career started, in Hong Kong in 1979. And so for the last 40 years, I've worked mainly in the airline business. A couple of years outside it during that time. Worked with a number of companies, 7 or 8, I guess, and worked in 12 different countries, lived and worked in 12 different countries. Along the way, I got married to my dear wife, Katrina, who's actually Japanese, although she had an Italian father, as it happens, and so she's Eurasian. But born and bred in Japan. So culturally, she's quite Japanese. And we have 3 kids who are in their 20s now. 2 daughters, and then the third one was a son. So yeah, they're all grown up. The youngest is 24, 2 in London, and then 1 in Singapore. That's my life in a nutshell. And I'm here working in Indigo now, which is India's biggest airline and very fast growing. And in fact, in terms of number of seats offered, I think we're in the top 10 airlines in the world now. We have a fleet of over 250 narrow-bodied aeroplanes, A320 family, and some ATRs. I have another number of other interests in life, of course, but maybe we'll get onto those later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Quite an impressive summary of who you are. I recall I met you in 2002. Then I was a sales executive in Lagos, being prepared to be shipped to Port Harcourt as a regional sales manager covering the eastern part of Nigeria. That was almost 18 years ago. The aviation industry, unlike most industries, experienced high degree of pressure, uncertainty, and of course, high volatility. I'm not sure I've experienced such constant adrenaline pump or rush since I left the industry. You were a giant in the industry at that time, and you have remained a force to be reckoned with in the aviation industry. We certainly can learn one or two things from you. How do you remain relevant in such a dynamic, suspense-filled, high-pressure, jet speed industry as aviation?
Well, you're right. I mean, it is an amazing business and a very difficult business, actually. Aviation, I think, because of the number of external forces which you don't have any control over, most notably, of course, fuel prices. But it's not just fuel prices, it's also things like weather, when you remember the volcano events. When you look at, obviously, we suffer when there is terrorism around the world. We suffer from currency weakness or strength. There's a huge number of things which, as an aviation or airline manager, you can't influence. But there are also big structural issues in the aviation industry which need to be sorted out eventually. And that is, of course, the role of the national carriers, because they inevitably distort the markets. And although in the US, or in North America and in Europe, you've seen over the last 30, 40 years, the airlines have been privatized gradually. Now, ironically, we're actually seeing the role of governments again take a bigger place in running airlines, because you've had governments take back shareholdings in airlines. Even my old employer, Cathay Pacific, now has a small government shareholding, which was unthinkable years ago. So for a number of reasons, the very capital-intensive industry, it's a tough business, and you have to be prepared for, almost constant sort of state of crisis. There's something or other happening, around the system where you're flying your aircraft, likely as not. Practically every day or every week, there are decisions to be made, and that's what makes it a very interesting, a very thrilling place to be, actually. I mentioned I spent a couple of years outside the aviation industry, a year and a half actually in Philadelphia, working for another Swire Group company, which was a cold storage warehousing company. And then much later in my career, I spent, again, about a year and a half outside aviation, working in a security company, actually in Dubai. And both those experiences brought home to me that, there's nothing like the airline business for a rush and, as you say, a thrill and, an intensity. I mean, at the other hand, it's not particularly well paid, maybe because of that. And I've had 3 children to educate and so on. And so I've stuck in it because I think it is something which gets in your blood. And you can't think of not being in the aviation industry. And when I've been outside it, I've always missed it, I mean, those businesses, both of them, were much better businesses in terms of return on investment, return on sales. They were generating good cash flow, good profit, steady 15, 20% a year in both cases. Whereas aviation, if you ever, in airlines, if you ever produce a 10% margin on sales, then, it's an absolutely fantastic year. Most of the time, you're scrabbling around. I mean, the 6 years I spent with Virgin, where you were, Akin, I was very I'm very proud of those 6 years as the commercial director, because we were profitable each of those years. If you look back at the record, but we were profitable. We earned 2% on sales or 3%. We weren't covering our cost of capital, but it was a private company, and so it didn't. As long as the shareholders were content, then it was fine. But it was a it was a difficult business. Any airline is a hard business, and you never can relax running airlines. But that's what makes it also very stimulating, and I think it's kept me young through all the last 40 years.
Indeed, and I remember the Virgin days and your drive at that time to focus on the yield and not just sell tickets. I remember quite vividly. And Port Harcourt then had, I think one of the highest yields in the network. And unfortunately, many underestimate the complexity of the aviation industry. Someone once told me, "You guys just sell tickets, right?"
Yeah.
However, having reached senior levels in the industry, I know it's one of the most challenged industries with respect to making profit, like you just described. High cost, high setup cost, high operating cost, massive security threat to cargo, to passenger section, heavy regulation, heavy control, political considerations. Most airlines, break even at 60% occupancy. However, slight variations from that can send your profits soaring high or tumbling down. Indigo Airline is is the most profitable airline in India. So well done to you, Willy, and your team. COVID-19 has, however, impacted demand for air travel significantly, with many airlines struggling even for air. Southwest Airlines, which has reported 47 years of consecutive profitability, expects this year, up to this month and August, about $50 million loss per day, $50 million loss per day. Delta and United, which were doing very well, after a few profitable years, are prepared for a full year of virtually, very, very significant passenger revenue. So I doff my hat, to aviation executives. As an executive director and the chief commercial officer for the airline with the largest market share in the second most populous country in the world, ahead of the United States, you must have brought out every trick in the book, ready to make your airline profitable again, after this crisis. My question to you, Willy, is what advice do you have for business owners, for entrepreneurs struggling through the pandemic, specifically, or struggling even through a business cycle in general terms?
Well, I think what we've benefited from very markedly is that our owners were sensible enough to build a cash reserve for the airline, which is one of the stronger ones, certainly very much the strongest in India, but was also looking globally. We were in the top 25% of airlines in terms of the cash reserve that was on our balance sheet when going into this crisis. And I think that's a good lesson really for any business owner, that you do need to have that conservatism, in my view, to look after the rainy day, because whatever business you're in, that rainy day is going to come at some stage. And I think you need to manage enterprises prudently, and always be looking at the downsides and what can go wrong, because something will go wrong, whatever business you're in, I think. And sometimes these days it's not it's not very obvious, but things creep up on you, and or potentially there's a reputational risk, with the huge explosion of media and the way that information travels so quickly. So you may think you're in a very profitable business and doing fine, and then something comes from left field, as the Americans would say, and surprises you, you know. So it's always good to have, I think, a very strong balance sheet, and, you know, to be secure in that sense. But you know, with the airline business, I mean, a strong balance sheet, you know, is not enough. And we've seen, you know, we have as I say, we're in the top 25%, but, you know, we are, you know, finding our way along through this crisis as best we can. But as I say, in general terms, that's the advice I would give any business owner. Just be prudent, because something will come along at some stage. And of course, this particular crisis is bigger than anyone had ever experienced before. So coming into it, and I know it's going to cause, you know, it has caused a lot of disruption, you know, a lot of losses, not just in the aviation world, but, you know, through the business world in general. And it's a great pity, you know, millions of people will lose their jobs and so on. And the future seems uncertain. But, you know, I'm confident that after a year or so, you know, hopefully we'll see things moving back in a positive direction.
Thank you very much, Willy. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I look through your profile, and I can see that for most of your career, at least 25 of your 40 years or so of working years, you have occupied, you know, pretty senior roles, senior leadership roles, executive roles, mainly C-suite roles. You were general manager in Cathay Pacific. You were executive vice president in South African Airways. You were the group chief commercial officer for Virgin Atlantic. You were the chief executive officer and the managing director of 2 organizations. You were vice president with Etihad. You were regional vice president accountable for Asia Pacific for IATA. So you sure know a few things about making yourself attractive to employers at the executive level. Aside from simply saying, work hard, what's the best advice you can give someone who wants a career as executive as yours? In other words, what advice do you have for viewers that want to make themselves attractive to lead an organization at the executive level, at VP level, EVP, CCO, CIO, CFO, CEO, and even non-executive board membership?
Yeah, it's not always easy, I think, to say that there's, you know, one particular attribute you need, or indeed one set of attributes that you need. I think you know, what has helped in my career was that I had a very strong foundation to it. In that I went to a prestigious university, Oxford University, and I then joined a very solid firm in John Swire & Sons, or Cathay Pacific, you know, which are well known and are well known also for their training. I mean, much of it was on the job training. I did get, you know, I was given sort of specific training relating to the airlines. So, you know, I had a load sheet license. I could load aeroplanes officially on paper. You know, I passed examinations. I had a cargo loading license. I had I'd done the reservations ticketing course, and we had all that sort of foundation, which was good. But actually what was important was the sort of first 3 years, where we were sent to 3 different places, a year in each. And you worked under people who'd been around the business for a long time, or much longer time than you know, sort of 15, 20 years. And you learned really on the job from them, from sort of watching what they did. And some were better than others. And it was important to sort of see, I think, what were the good things you were learning and what were the things that you shouldn't learn and you should forget about, you know, in someone's behavior as in management. And I think that, you know, for young people, I always say, many of them come to me and they say, oh, I want to go and do an MBA. And I give them similar advice. I say, look, an MBA I think is fantastic. I don't have one. I did look at doing a program actually when I was in the cold storage warehousing business in Philadelphia. But the company wasn't going to support me, so they said, no, experience is much better than an MBA. You know, an MBA won't teach you anything. You'll learn stuff, you know, on the job. And that was their philosophy. But when young people come to me, I say, yes, do an MBA, but make sure you go to the best possible institution. You know, there are many, many universities around the world offering MBAs, but frankly, you want to be going to one of the top ones. You know, don't waste your time for a year or 2 years at a place which doesn't have a reputation that's going to get you that next level job and launch your career. So I was very lucky in that sense. You know, I went to a good obviously a great university, and then I joined a great company. And so when it's come to selling myself sort of further, you know, people look at my CV and they think, and in fact, later on, you know, I joined South African Airways from Cathay, which was not at the time a great airline, and well, it certainly isn't now anymore, and it's suffered a lot. But right then, there was an American manager or boss, Coleman Andrews, who had a vision. And, you know, he wanted to make that airline into a world-leading airline. He wanted a global management team to help him do it. So that in itself was quite exciting. I mean, it didn't come to much at the end. He unfortunately fell out with the government, and, you know, things changed. And I left, but then I went to Virgin, you know, and of course, Virgin Atlantic has another, you know, very strong reputation. Maybe not quite the same as the Cathay reputation, but you know, everybody knows Virgin Atlantic. And, you know, I was in a relatively senior position there and managing all the expansion, the new routes. You know, we took the 340-600 at that time, and which was an interesting aircraft program to be involved with. And, you know, we did interesting stuff like start services to Port Harcourt, you know, where you were involved, where we met. And, you know, sadly, that didn't last as a route, but you know, we were able to do a lot of interesting things. We started, you know, serving, you know, places in Asia that we hadn't been to before. Just after I left, I started Nairobi, actually. And then we did other things like increase our Las Vegas service to daily. And, you know, there was a lot of expansion, but it was profitable expansion. But to go back to your question, you know, that's, to me, you know, have a strong foundation, and you can build on that. And actually, you know, joining good organizations is worthwhile, whether it's for study or for work. You know, hang out, try and get the best possible brand on your CV, and if you're going to have a career that takes you around, then, you know, having that foundation is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think those points are really very valid, and I quite agree with each one of them. I want to ask another question. You had the privilege, Willy, to have occupied strategic roles, some of which you mentioned just now, in key organizations that folks, you know, will dream of, you know, from the good, the bad to the ugly. South African Airways, Angolan Airlines, Gulf, Etihad. In fact, you were the CEO of Russia's first low-cost carrier, Cathay Pacific, and all that. Was there ever a role you landed but weren't 100% qualified to do? How did you proceed?
I think, you know, I've been lucky in that most of the jobs I was put in, you know, were things I was interested in. I think that's the most important thing. But one of the roles I remember from some time back was when I was asked to run the IT side of Cathay Pacific. And I was a young, I would have been about 33 then, I suppose, or 34. And it was the first time they'd made me a general manager. And so, you know, it was a big promotion for me. And it was a big job in the airline. I had 300, 400 staff, budget. I'm going back to 1990 of sort of $80 million a year. I think we were spending $80, $100 million. You know, it was a very significant thing, and we had all these computer systems running the airline basically. And it was a role for which I was completely unsuited in a way. I mean, I have my degree was in modern history. I'm not a particularly computer literate sort of person, and nor did I have much interest in it. But what the company was doing was they wanted someone with a very commercial sort of real world experience of selling. I'd worked in the Philippines, in Japan, in India, in Canada. I'd worked in marketing a bit. They wanted somebody who could sort of bring that whole department back closer to the airline, because at that time, IT departments used to drift away, and they'd go and start doing their own thing, and they had these big budgets, and there'd be people there who were sort of off attending conferences half the year, just seeing what the latest new thing was, and they'd taken the IT had sort of drifted away, and I was given very clear instruction: bring it back. But to address that, I mean, I knew I could never learn, how the systems worked or whatever. I was given some good advice by a couple of people in the company who'd done that job before, one of whom was a generalist like me. And he actually sent me on a course, as it happened at Harvard, for a couple of weeks. There was sort of managing the IT resource as a sort of Harvard course taught by a couple of brilliant professors, one Jim Cash and the other one Warren McFarlane. And they basically gave me that sort of the management kind of structure, if you like, that I needed, or the management knowledge about the importance of the IT function to any business, especially airlines. And I on two dimensions. First, it sort of keeps the business running, so you need to have it absolutely working properly. And then secondly, it can give the business competitive advantage, and particularly with airlines, things like revenue management is an obvious one, or in network planning, or even in movement control, in operations control. You could get competitive advantage by having the right sort of systems. So that course actually was very, very valuable. But then, more than that, I mean, in terms of trying to fit into that role, the key thing, it was people. It's a key thing in most businesses. For all the technology around these days and all the move to digital and so on, you've still got to manage those people. And in SWAR and in Cathay, I think we were trained pretty well how to manage people, and communication is the absolute key thing. Both within that department, I found, the different areas, as I say, it was 300 or 400 people, but then also the communication of each of the parts of that department with the outside airline, and managing that. So I ended up actually moving quite a lot of the people into the departments themselves rather than keeping it in central IT resource. So I think, you need to, at a senior management level, conceptually, you need to have the right sort of idea. And sometimes you need help getting that. And as I say, one of my seniors sort of said, do this course. And it was a way of sort of structuring that whole IT sort of thing in my mind. And I stayed there for 4 years. So the company must have thought I was doing okay. Else they would have moved me after a year or two. But so that was an experience where definitely I wasn't expecting it, and I wasn't prepared for IT at all. But I'm glad I did it, because it also taught me stuff about IT people, who these sort of so-called, nerds or whatever, how everyone describes them. Actually, they're very creative people. Many of them have astonishing creativity, and in terms of being able to produce, to look at a business problem and be able to produce a system and spec that system, and just be absolutely focused to improve, to give you an automated way. And now, of course, the whole digital, revolution is that kind of old IT stuff on steroids. It's run by a lot of very creative and very able people.
Good sharing, Willy. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Whether you realize it or not, whether you are conscious of it or not, success or failure in life is a summation of choices we make or decisions we take. When we make a choice, we forego the consequences of the alternative or alternatives. That's what the economists call opportunity cost. Because man is finite, we choose to either invest or not to invest. We choose to either attend to or not attend to. We choose to either push forward or pull back, to either say yes or we say no. Someone said successful people, they make the right decisions early and manage the decisions daily. Of course, all you need are a few bad decisions to wreck your life. Could you tell me of a time when you had to make a difficult decision, which you knew its outcome has the potential to either make or mar you?
Well, I think, there was a personal decision I made, which was probably, a big one at the time. And that was actually to leave Cathay and to leave SWAR after 20 years. Where, I was in a reasonable place, career-wise. I had, in fact, been the youngest general manager ever, I think, when they gave me that IT job. And then I did a couple of other jobs after that, senior GM roles. And then I decided to leave. And it was a tough decision at the time. It was not one that I felt easy taking. I mean, the easy thing would have been to stay, but I had a number of things move through my mind, and I think it's a good lesson for everyone that sometimes career is not everything, and one sort of consideration, if you like, was I felt I didn't want to be a sort of single company guy. The choice was sort of leaving at that stage when I was 42, or basically staying until the retirement age at that stage was 55. It's subsequently got older, but I would have stayed till I was 58 or whatever. But I was kind of, I was torn making that decision. South African Airways had come along and made me this great offer, actually initially to go to London and run the sort of European operation. And, that was attractive to me because I'd never worked in London. My parents were there getting older. My kids were very young. I mean, they were sort of 8, 6, and 4. I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in Hong Kong for the rest of my career. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stay, as I mentioned, with one company forever, because I think then you're always wondering, what could you have done, better, or did you stretch yourself as much as you should have done? And for all these reasons, and other reasons, actually, I did learn a lesson. It so happened that, one of my very senior, one of the very senior people had taken over, and he wasn't a big fan of mine, I knew. And I thought to myself, well, my career's not going to prosper if this guy is around. And actually, he was a great person in many ways, but he and I had just fallen out, unfortunately. I knew that I wasn't on his sort of blue-eyed boy list, and in a company, in a very traditional company, how you were sort of perceived by chairman or whatever was important. So that was another reason I left, because he'd sort of assumed the position. Well, big lesson here was that very sadly, 2 years later, he actually passed away. But of course, I couldn't have known that. And somebody else, took over, who was perhaps much more sympathetic to me, or would have been. And that to me is also a big lesson in life. And again, when younger people come and say, oh, I'm working for this terrible boss, and I'm really fed up with it, and I'm going to leave the company. And I always say to them, well, you may be frustrated at the moment. You may be, in two minds whether to leave or not. You may not like the person you're reporting to. He may not like you, or she may not like you. You may be in a difficult place, but things change in life, unexpectedly. And however well managed you think your career can be, things will change, and unexpected things happen. So don't, sometimes you just have to suck it up for a bit. Now, I'm not saying I would have changed, my decision going back. I mean, you should never regret what you do, or look back in a oh, I wish I'd stayed or whatever. I don't, because actually having left that sort of soir, very in Cathay, very, very solid kind of place, but having left there, I then had a number of fantastic sort of experiences, which I would never have had if I'd stayed in that world. And so I don't regret it at all. I mean, I've worked in some fantastic, obviously Africa to start with. I would have never worked in Africa without leaving Cathay and Swire. I worked, obviously in Russia, in the Gulf, Angola again in Africa, then back here in India. I've had some tremendous experience with tremendous people, working quite closely many times with Richard Branson, for instance. That again, fantastic experience. And then, with a number of other leaders in different businesses, people like James Hogan and Etihad, all very sort of larger than life characters, but fascinating to work with. So in that sense, it was the right decision. And I think my life, has been quite rich. I've been fortunate in that I have managed to sort of sell myself and to keep going in the airline business, where, some people, when they leave a very well-established company, they struggle. But I've been fortunate, and, I've obviously worked pretty hard and tried to make myself relevant each time. So I have managed to, have people sort of call me up, out of the blue sometimes and say, hey, how about this job here? So in that respect, I've been fortunate. But that was probably from my personal, decision making, that was the most difficult decision I faced, I think. And it was something I did entirely voluntarily. South African Airways came along, and suddenly I thought, there's a world out there, maybe I'll try it.
Thank you very much, Willy. I remember, when I was about leaving British Airways for Virgin, I wanted Virgin so badly, and when I finally got the letter of appointment, I wasn't sure again, and I had a lot of folks, because we did quite understand Richard Branson in Nigeria, at least people that were close to me. They're like, the guy's a weirdo, the guy is crazy, Are you sure you want to work for, do you want to leave British Airways and go work for that guy, and the only reason why I left BA then was the fact that there were rumors all over the place, and I got an offer for Virgin, and of course I was so young, and I was scared that, if they found out they were going to fire me, I'm like, okay, before they do fire me, let me resign. And that's how I resigned. I ran away run into Virgin. Question, Willy, how do you separate, or rather, at that time when you took the decision, how were you able to separate your feelings from the decision making? Because, I was overwhelmed with my feelings and what people were telling me, and I was like crippled. I was like immobilized. I couldn't move ahead. So how are you able to separate your feelings from what you should be doing?
I think it's very hard because, at least in my case, I find it quite hard to look at such a personal decision as in that case, as in your career choice. It's hard to look at it entirely rationally. I mean, I think the only thing that's helped me is sometimes writing down, sort of pros and cons, and every time you write it down, thinking through that particular subject or whatever, and that helps. But I think no decision around what I described is a rational, entirely rational decision. You go with your heart, and as I say, part of the emotion for me was, do I really want to stay here forever? Will I end up 55 or 60 or whatever, thinking to myself, oh, I never really tried anything else, I mean, there are plenty of my friends, good friends. I mean, there was a saying that which one of our number came up with, which is relating to the Cathay and the Swire people. You can leave the firm, but you never leave the club. And it's been so true. I mean, very many of my closest friends are people I know from those 20 years. And that sort of bond you don't get away from, because we worked as young men together, men in general. I mean, there were some ladies, but they generally came along a bit later. But as young men, sort of posted in different places in Asia, you all went through the experience of trying to get to know this business and get to know how to work in an Asian environment, which is very different to how we were brought up, perhaps. So yeah, I mean, it's still a very strong part of my history. And again, one of the other perhaps things just to say to younger people who might see this is, when I went into that company, to me it was a firm, and they treated me pretty well, and I had an excellent 20 years there. But I thought that other companies would be the same or as good or better in some cases, but they weren't actually. It is a very, very strong firm, Swire and all its component parts, and very well managed. And the reason it is so strong is that certainly at that time, and I think it still persists today, the sort of attention to detail when it came to people was huge. And John Swire, who was the family chairman for most of the time I was there, or much of the time, I should say, probably not most of the time. But he said, look, if I hire good people, and if I put them in the right places and I manage them well, I don't need to worry about the business. And it's a very simple concept, but it's one which, I think a huge number of successful entrepreneurs and people who've gone through the sort of startup, scaling up, suddenly they've woken up one day and they're running a business that's worth billions. I think they need to understand that lesson, and they need to stop worrying about the business. But the only way you can do that is by recruiting and training, and making sure the culture is in this team that you have. You need that solid group of people. And I worked very interestingly for a number of entrepreneurs, and some of them have it and some of them don't. I mean, I think in Virgin's case, I think it was very much there, and I think Richard was very good at recognizing that he couldn't do stuff himself. He had to have a good team around him, and he shouldn't be making decisions all the time, even big decisions. And he would take advice, and I thought he was great, and I really enjoyed working for him. And he also taught me stuff. One particular anecdote maybe that when shortly after I joined, we were talking about putting a kind of divider into the upper class, which you remember was the sort of very, very successful business class product that was basically basically almost a first class. But at one stage he said, "Oh, why don't we just curtain off the first 2 rows, and we'll call it first class, and we'll charge people much more, and we'll give them a different, brand of champagne or something, and we'll make more money." And it was just he and myself and one other person in the room, and I hardly knew him. I said, "Richard, but that's a gimmick." And he looked at me and said, "Yes, Willy, it's a gimmick." And that was a kind of light bulb went on in my mind that actually this, there's another way of managing. The sort of the system I'd been brought up with was don't do anything which is gimmicky. Just do stuff which is sort of 100% certain and for sure, and do what you say you're going to do and so on. But actually Richard's mind, he has his entrepreneurial mind. He said, well, yes, it's a gimmick, but if you can do it, you make more money. But anyway, I managed to persuade him not to do it because I thought it was too much of a gimmick, and I couldn't see, the chairman of a bank sort of being enticed by slightly better champagne. And the other component to it was that he was going to give them, sort of vouchers at Virgin Megastore or something as well. And again, I didn't see that as a particularly good gimmick. But he was it's great, fantastic things from people like that. But as I say, if you run a business, you must understand how to manage people. And I think that's absolutely key, whatever the nature of the business. Once it gets beyond a certain size, you have to understand that you've got to get a good team around you.
Thank you very much, Willy. Thank you very much for those stories. Very, very insightful. Your carrier, Indigo, holds 50% of the market share in India. It's the largest individual Asian low-cost carrier in terms of 2 key metrics. That's the fleet size and passenger carried. In your last financial report, you reported to have carried over 64 million passengers safely, with about 1,500 flights per day. What should your market, the traveling population in India's 1.4 billion people, expect from Indigo over the next 12 months?
Well, I mean, we are, as you mentioned, the biggest airline here, and our mission is really to provide great connectivity, but with certain, hassle-free, nature. Because in India, traveling, there used to be a lot of hassle. We pride ourselves on our on-time performance. Which is, again, something that wasn't very common in India, but now I think people have caught up with us generally. And of course, we provide low prices, and we've been able to stimulate demand and take people away from traveling on a train for 48 hours, sometimes longer, to get across India. Take them into a flight which takes two hours or 3 hours, and that's basically our mission is to produce great connectivity, and airlines they have a great effect on the GDP of a country. They are both beneficiaries in the sense that the faster the GDP grows, the better for an airline. Generally, your traffic grows. I mean, there's a sort of rule of thumb in the business that if the GDP is growing at 6%, your traffic as an airline will grow at roughly 12%. Whether that's true or not, it depends on the market. But there is that rule of thumb. But equally, I always say that yes, but also part of that GDP growth is contributed by the airline. It's a virtuous circle, and we were set up again on very good foundations. It was really a very brilliant sort of set of circumstances and a great set of people who founded this airline now 14 years ago. And for us, we've got this obviously setback at the moment, but we're confident that we're going to come out of this. And our CEO Rano, as Dutta has said, let's come out of it stronger than we were going in. So from my perspective, we've done a lot through the lockdown period. First of all, to make sure that we have the right stance in the market, we've come up with this lean, clean flying machine concept because we realize that the first worry that people will have is all about their safety from the virus on board, and that the cleanliness and the way that we can make their journeys more comfortable. We are issuing obviously masks and visors and sanitizers and so on board. Our crew have PPE, etc. And we're not serving food right now. We're doing everything we can to make sure that it is a safe journey. So that's in the immediate term. But longer term, depending on how fast India recovers from the pandemic, clearly we want to get back to where we were. And at the moment, we think that it will be probably 12 months from now. I mean, what we've said so far is that by the end of this financial year, so by the end of March 2021, we will be back at 70% of what we expected to operate before the virus. And clearly, we want to make sure that we continue to grow from there just as fast as we can. But we do take our responsibilities towards the Indian market very seriously. And we've had a lot of success in the past, and we want to be successful again to provide this vital connectivity across this vast nation.
Good. And I read about your clean machines. I read about the HEPA filters as well. Very good.
Sorry, so the lean, clean flying machine.
Yes. And the filters, I think it's HEPA filter, right?
HEPA filter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Willy, for your time and for agreeing to be a guest at the MakeorMar moment with Monehin. I would like you to close with whatever is in your heart or your mind. Thank you once again, Willy.
No, it's been my pleasure, Akin. And it's one of the great things about my slightly peripatetic life is that, I've had friends from all cultures, all races, all nations. And as I said, I come from a very international family. My wife is Japanese, Italian, and my kids, as a result, quarter Japanese, quarter Italian, quarter Irish, and a quarter British. And it's just been great to, be able to work across this wonderful world of ours. And I think, hopefully, we'll get through this challenge. And, I very much hope that some of our political barriers will start to come down again. And, we'll live in an ever more prosperous world, and particularly in Africa. I mean, I've had 2 stints working in Africa, and I'm a great believer in the spirit of the people across the African continent. And I think that, Africa has so much to offer, and that, just like Asia has done over the last 30 or 40 years, and I've been lucky enough to be in Asia most of the time, I'm sure that the same will happen in Africa, and, people will have exciting careers there as well.
Thank you so much, Willy. Thank you for your time.